Mom invited my ex to family dinners without telling me, and now my husband's lost his patience with her. Imagine this. You're heading to a family dinner, excited to catch up with everyone, maybe have a good laugh, and just enjoy some time together. But then you walk into the dining room, and your heart nearly stops. Sitting at the table, casually chatting with your mom like it's the most normal thing in the world, is your ex. Yes, my ex. No warning, no heads up, just there, smiling. And I was completely blindsided. At first I thought, surely this is some kind of mistake. Maybe he showed up unexpectedly and my mom was just being polite. But no. As I'd later find out, my mom had invited him. Deliberately. Without even thinking to let me know. I can't even begin to describe the whirlwind of emotions I felt in that moment. Confusion, betrayal, frustration. My husband, sitting beside me, was just as shocked as I was. This wasn't a one-time thing either. Oh no. My mom didn't see a problem with it. She kept doing it, dinner after dinner, despite me telling her how uncomfortable it made me. I mean, who does that? Who brings someone from your past, someone who caused you so much pain, into your present life without asking? But here's the kicker. It wasn't just about me. My husband, my rock, the one person who's been my biggest supporter, had been incredibly patient through all of this. He'd tried to let it slide, hoping my mom would eventually understand. But after months of this, he'd had enough. He hit his breaking point. And honestly, I couldn't blame him. This whole situation has been a roller coaster. A mix of awkward dinners, tense conversations, and moments that made me question how well my mom truly understands the concept of respect. So here we are, caught between a mom who refuses to see reason, an ex who doesn't seem to know when to back off, and a husband who's doing everything he can to stand by me while keeping his sanity intact. It's messy, it's exhausting, and it's incredibly hurtful. And let me tell you, this story only gets more complicated from here. Buckle up. To really understand how things got so messy, let me give you a little backstory. My mom, well, she's always been the kind of person who likes to take charge. She's strong-willed, opinionated, and honestly, a little too controlling at times. Don't get me wrong, she loves me, and I know she means well. But when it comes to boundaries, let's just say they've never been her strong suit. Now my ex, where do I even start? On the surface, he was charming, confident, and had this way of making you feel like you were the center of the universe. At first, it felt magical, like I'd found someone who really got me. But over time, the cracks started to show. His charm had a darker side. He was manipulative, selfish, and always had this knack for twisting situations to make himself the victim. Looking back, I realized just how toxic that relationship was. It wasn't just the fights or the lies, it was the way he made me doubt myself. Like I wasn't good enough unless I lived up to his impossible standards. Leaving him was one of the hardest decisions I ever made. At the time, I felt broken, like a part of me had been ripped away. But deep down, I knew I deserved better. I deserved someone who would respect me, love me for who I was, and not constantly play games with my emotions. And that's when my life changed. Enter my husband. From the moment I met him, I could tell he was different. He wasn't flashy or over the top. He was steady, kind, and genuine. He saw me. Not the version of me I thought I had to be, but the real me. It was like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in years, I felt safe, happy, and truly loved. When we got married, I thought that chapter of my life, the one with my ex, was firmly closed. My husband and I built a life together, one filled with laughter, mutual respect, and this incredible sense of partnership. He's always been my biggest supporter, my rock when things get tough. So you can imagine my shock when my mom started bringing my ex back into the picture. It wasn't like she didn't know how toxic he was, or how much pain that relationship caused me. She knew. I'd told her everything. But for some reason, she seemed to think it was no big deal. Maybe she thought it was harmless, or maybe she just didn't care enough to understand how hurtful it was. Either way, her actions didn't just stir up old wounds for me, they also put a strain on my marriage. My husband, bless him, tried so hard to be patient and understanding, but even he has his limits. And honestly, I don't blame him. This whole situation has made me question so much. About my mom, about how she sees me, and about what it means to truly respect someone you love. And as much as I want to believe this is all just a misunderstanding, deep down, I know it's more than that. It's about control, boundaries, and the choices we make to protect our peace. The first time my ex showed up at a family dinner, it felt like I had stepped into an alternate reality. My husband and I had just arrived at my mom's house expecting a regular evening with my family. We walked into the dining room, and there he was, my ex, sitting at the table, chatting with my mom, like nothing was out of the ordinary. At first, I froze. I honestly thought I was seeing things. I turned to my husband, and the look on his face told me he was just as confused as I was. My heart started racing, and a million questions flooded my mind. Why is he here? Who invited him? Does everyone know about this except me? I didn't want to make a scene right then and there, so I plastered on a polite smile and sat down, but I could barely eat. I kept glancing over at him, feeling more and more uncomfortable with every passing minute. It wasn't just his presence, it was how casual he was, like he belonged there, like this was his family. And my mom? She acted like it was the most normal thing in the world. She didn't even acknowledge how weird it was. As soon as dinner was over, I pulled my mom aside. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I couldn't hide my frustration. I asked her, "Why is he here? Why would you invite him without telling me?" She looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable and said, "Oh, he's like family. He misses us, and I didn't think it would be a big deal." A big deal? It was a huge deal. She knew how much pain that relationship had caused me. She knew how hard I had worked to move on and build a new life with my husband. Yet, here she was, acting like my ex was some long-lost son she needed to welcome back into the fold. I tried to explain how it made me feel, how awkward, blindsided, and honestly hurt I was. But she just brushed it off. She told me I was overreacting, and that I needed to be more understanding. It was like talking to a brick wall. No matter what I said, she wouldn't hear me. At that moment, I felt so dismissed, like my feelings didn't matter at all. Part of me wanted to leave right then and there, but I decided to let it slide for the sake of keeping the peace. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that it wouldn't happen again. But deep down, I had this sinking feeling that it wasn't over. I didn't realize it at the time, but that night was just the beginning. And as uncomfortable as it was, I had no idea how much worse things would get. After that first dinner, I thought my mom might have realized how wrong it was to invite my ex without telling me. I thought she'd reflect on our conversation and at least try to understand why it hurt me so much. But unfortunately, I was wrong. Completely wrong. The next time it happened, it felt like a bad case of déjà vu. We showed up for another family dinner, and there he was again, sitting in his new usual spot at the table, laughing with my mom. I felt my stomach drop. My husband glanced at me, his jaw tightening, but he didn't say a word. We both sat down, because, honestly, what else could we do in that moment? I barely touched my food that night. My mind was racing, replaying every word of the conversation I'd had with my mom after the first dinner. I had been so clear about how uncomfortable this made me. I had practically poured my heart out, explaining how seeing my ex dredged up old wounds, how it made me feel disrespected, not just as her daughter, but as a wife. And yet, here we were again, like my feelings didn't even matter. It wasn't just awkward, it was exhausting. Every time we went over to her house, I found myself on edge, wondering if he'd be there. It got to the point where I didn't even want to go anymore. The anxiety was just too much. I started to feel like I couldn't even trust my own mom. That betrayal, it cuts deeper than I ever imagined. My husband tried so hard to be supportive. He saw how much this was eating away at me and wanted to help. At first, he stayed calm, even when I could see how frustrated he was. He'd squeeze my hand under the table or give me a reassuring look, silently letting me know he had my back. Afterward, he'd tell me to let him know if I needed him to step in, but I always said no. I wanted to handle it myself. I tried again to talk to my mom. This time I didn't just tell her how I felt. I practically begged her to stop. I told her it wasn't just about me, it was about my marriage, about the respect she should have for me as her daughter, and for my husband as her son-in-law. I asked her to imagine how she would feel if the roles were reversed. But instead of hearing me out, she just waved it off. She told me I was being dramatic, that my ex wasn't trying to cause any trouble, and that he just missed being part of the family. She even said, "You're the one who ended things with him. Why does it bother you so much that he still wants to stay close to us?" Can you believe that? I couldn't understand how she could be so dismissive. I wasn't asking for much, just a little respect, a little acknowledgement that my feelings mattered. But no matter how many times I tried to explain it, it felt like I was talking to a wall. And the worst part? Every time she ignored my boundaries, it chipped away at me a little more. I started to feel this mix of anger, sadness, and hopelessness, like nothing I said or did would ever get through to her. And my husband, he was losing his patience too. I could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice. He didn't want to overstep, but he also hated seeing me so upset. It was becoming too much for both of us, and I knew something had to give. But I just didn't know what to do anymore. My mom's actions weren't just hurting me, they were driving a wedge into my family, and the cracks were starting to show. The breaking point came on what should have been a simple family dinner. My husband and I had already debated whether to go. Honestly, we were both so tired of the drama, but I kept telling myself, this time will be different. She wouldn't dare. I wanted to believe my mom would respect our boundaries, even if she didn't agree with them. But the moment we walked in, I knew I was wrong. My ex was there again, sitting comfortably in my dad's old chair, acting as if he owned the place. It was like he had been invited back into the family without any input from me. The night started off awkward enough, but things went downhill fast. My ex wasn't just there, he was overly familiar, like he was trying to play the role of a close family friend, or, worse, someone still involved in my life. He made jokes about the good old days we shared, all while ignoring my husband completely. At one point, he even leaned in to touch my shoulder, like we were still close. My stomach churned, and I felt trapped. What made it worse was my mom's reaction. Instead of shutting him down or creating some distance, she encouraged it. She laughed at his jokes, reminisced about old times with him, and even said, "You've always been like a son to us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like she was rewriting history, ignoring everything I had gone through with him. I glanced at my husband, and the look on his face said it all. He had reached his limit. I could feel the tension building, like a storm about to break. And then, it happened. My husband, who had been so patient, so calm through all of this, finally spoke up. He didn't yell or cause a scene. He didn't need to. His voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the frustration behind it. He turned to my mom and said, "I think we need to address the elephant in the room. You keep inviting someone who hurt my wife and disrespects our marriage. This isn't okay, and it's not fair to us." The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. My mom looked stunned, like she couldn't believe he was calling her out in front of everyone. My ex shifted uncomfortably in his seat, finally realizing he wasn't as welcome as he thought. My mom, of course, got defensive. She immediately started making excuses, saying things like, "I just wanted to keep the peace," and "You're blowing this out of proportion." She tried to make it seem like we were the ones being unreasonable, like she was just trying to do something kind. But my husband didn't back down. He calmly but firmly explained how much her actions were hurting us and how it felt like she was choosing my ex over our family. By the end of the dinner, the atmosphere was so tense, I could barely breathe. My mom refused to apologize, insisting she had done nothing wrong. My ex made a hasty exit, clearly uncomfortable, and honestly, I was glad to see him go. As for me, I was left feeling a mix of emotions: relief that my husband had stood up for us, but also sadness that it had come to this. I never wanted a confrontation like that, especially with my own mother, but at the same time I knew it was necessary. Something had to change, and if this was the only way to make her see how serious we were, then so be it. After that confrontation, I hoped things would change. I thought maybe, just maybe, my mom would take a step back and realize how much her actions were affecting me and everyone else. But instead, she dug her heels in deeper. She didn't apologize. Not once. In fact, she doubled down on everything, insisting she hadn't done anything wrong. According to her, she was just being kind, trying to include someone she cared about. She kept saying things like, "You're overreacting," or "He's like family to us, and I don't see why this bothers you so much." Every word felt like a slap in the face. How could she not understand that this wasn't about him? It was about respect. Respect for me, for my marriage, for my boundaries. The fallout from all of this rippled through our entire family. Dinners became unbearably awkward. It felt like everyone was walking on eggshells, pretending things were normal when they clearly weren't. My siblings didn't want to get involved, and while they sympathized with me, they also didn't want to challenge Mom. It left me feeling isolated, like I was standing alone on this giant, shaky bridge between my past and my present. For my husband, though, the choice was clear. He told me he couldn't keep putting up with this, and honestly, I couldn't blame him. He had been so patient, so understanding, but enough was enough. He supported me every step of the way, even when it meant we had to start skipping family events. At first, it felt strange not to go. I had always been the type to prioritize family, even when it was hard. But this was different. It took time, more time than I care to admit, but eventually, I started to see things more clearly. I realized that prioritizing family doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being. It doesn't mean tolerating disrespect or allowing someone else's choices to overshadow your own happiness. Setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you stronger. The hardest part was coming to terms with the fact that my mom might never change. I wanted her to understand, to see things from my perspective, but I couldn't force that. All I could do was protect my peace and focus on the family I was building with my husband. Reflecting on everything, I've learned that self-respect isn't just about standing up to others, it's about standing up for yourself. It's about recognizing your worth and refusing to let anyone, even someone you love, take that away. Yes, it hurt to pull back from family events, but it hurt even more to keep showing up, knowing I wasn't being respected. Choosing to distance myself wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And honestly, in doing so, I found a kind of strength I didn't know I had. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my mom. I still love her, but love doesn't mean accepting behavior that breaks you down. For now, I'm focused on protecting my happiness, my marriage, and the life my husband and I are building together. And if that means stepping back, so be it. I deserve peace, and I won't apologize for finding it. As I look back on everything that's happened, it's hard not to feel a mix of emotions. There's the anger and hurt from the way my mom treated me, the frustration from trying to set boundaries that kept getting ignored, but there's also a sense of clarity. This whole experience has taught me a lot about boundaries, about love, and about knowing when to walk away. The biggest lesson I've learned? Boundaries are non-negotiable. No matter who it is, whether it's family, friends, or anyone else, your peace and self-respect should never be up for debate. I've realized that just because someone is close to you, it doesn't mean they have the right to disrespect you or push your limits. And sometimes protecting your peace means distancing yourself, even from people you care about. I can't deny it was painful to set those boundaries with my mom, especially since we had such a complicated relationship. But in the end, I know it was the right choice. It wasn't just for me, it was for my marriage, my happiness, and my future. Having a supportive partner like my husband made all the difference. He stood by me, even when it was hard, and that made me realize just how important it is to surround yourself with people who truly have your back. It's tough. There are days when I miss the family closeness I once had, but I also know that sometimes stepping away from toxic situations is the only way to protect your peace. It's not easy, but it's necessary. And if any of you watching have been in a similar situation, or have advice to share, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let's have an open conversation about boundaries, respect, and protecting the relationships that matter most. Your stories might help someone else who's going through something similar, and together, we can learn how to prioritize our well-being. Thanks for listening to mine.